Faria Bukhari right now live over here at Phoenix City Hall, and I'm doing this live protest against both Israel and India, who are currently committing a genocide of Muslims and Christians and minority um, in order to achieve their vested geopolitical agenda of expansionism and global domination. We saw the same trend before the World War II happened. We saw how Hitler did the same things that both the Modi regime and the Naftali Bennett regime has been doing, and before him, Netanyahu was doing. And we saw where it led the world to. It led the world to a world war. And right now, as I speak these words, the world is already embroiled in a World War III, which is most likely going to be nuclear in Ukraine. So it is me standing here alone by myself trying to protest against the recent aggression, escalation of violence of Israel against the Palestinians. They were saying their prayers during the Ramadan time. They were fasting and they were saying their regular prayers in the Mosque of Al-Aqsa. And the Israeli soldiers, they invaded, intruded, and they actually attacked them, assaulted them with rubber bullets. These Palestinians were not armed. They were not a threat. They were not doing anything to justify this escalation of violence against peaceful worshippers in a mosque. This is against every norm of human rights, not just on the Charter of US, but international rights. No one has yet condemned this assault in the United Nations. No one has condemned this assault in the US Congress except Ilhan and Rashida, who are, by the way, Muslims. What happened to the non-Muslims of America? Why aren't human rights not a big deal for you anymore? What happened to the non-Muslim American congressmen and women? What is your religion? If you are a Jew, I ask you this question standing over here in front of the Phoenix City Hall. Does Moses, peace be upon him, condone to violence being committed against peaceful worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque? No. Moses, peace be upon him, would never condone to such violence and aggression against peaceful worshippers in a mosque. That is not the religion that Moses, peace be upon him, taught and preached. He taught a religion of tolerance and peace and harmony and love, sharing. And what are the Israelis doing? They are the biggest anti-Semites of the world who have technically violated every charter that Moses, peace be upon him, brought in Torah. So I'm asking the Jewish community of the US Congress, how come it is not your responsibility to stand up for what Moses, peace be upon him, stood for? How can you allow Israel to go rogue, committing violations of what the Torah has taught you? I ask the Christian community of the US Congress, how come you're allowing this kind of genocide to happen right in front of your eyes when Jesus, peace be upon him, would have never condoned to this kind of violence and escalation of aggression against peaceful worshippers? These people were not armed. These people were not a threat. These people were just trying to say their prayers in a mosque. And more than 500 were arrested by the Israeli police that day. And since then, they have been trying to invade, intrude the peace of the mosque, not allowing the worshippers to commit their worship in a mosque in the month of Ramadan, which is a holy month. There is no religious tolerance by your buddy and ally in Israel that is currently exhibiting every violation of not just human rights, but Torah as well. That is being the biggest anti-Semite by violating and rejecting the principles that Moses, peace be upon him, stood for, and that the Torah is teaching and preaching. How can you justify this? Same goes for the Christian community of the US Congress. How can you justify such attack and assault on peaceful Muslim worshippers in Al-Aqsa? How can you stand by such action of aggression? Jesus, peace be upon him, would never condone to such violence, and your tax dollars are now being spent to support, arm, and sponsor this aggression, this genocide. How will you show your faces on the day of judgment to Moses, peace be upon him, and Jesus, peace be upon him, who would never condone to this genocide of Palestinians happening right in front of your eyes? This is anti-Semitism. This is extremism. This is fascism. This is fanaticism. There is no justification for this. Not in any dictionary of the world. Not in any religion of the world. How can the Americans allow their corrupt congressmen and women to support, arm, sponsor this aggression and escalation of violence against peaceful worshippers in a mosque? Little children are being kidnapped every day who have no crime except that they're Palestinians. There are thousands of Palestinians right now being detained for just being Palestinians. This is a genocide happening right in front of your eyes, with your money, with your support, with your sponsorship. And give me one good reason. How can you justify this in the eyes of Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, in the eyes of Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him? Both stood up against oppression. Both stood up against persecution. Both preached tolerance. Both taught religious tolerance, coexistence, peace. This is genocide. This is not what Jesus, peace be upon him, has taught you. This is not what Moses, peace be upon him, has taught you. Israel is committing anti-Semitism on your tab. Israel is a war criminal. How can you allow your tax dollars to support a country that has violated every international law in the Dictionary of Human Rights? Coming to India, what is India doing? India is also doing the same thing. The Indian RSS terrorists are attacking, assaulting worshippers in mosques right now with their saffron flags, and they are on a full-fledged mission to commit a genocide of Muslims in India. And it is not just Muslims. They want to commit a genocide of every non-Hindu. And who are the non-Hindus in India? They're Christians. There are millions of Christians in India. How will you stand up in front of Jesus, peace be upon him, when Indian RSS terrorists try to persecute your Christian brothers in India and you don't do anything about it? Why won't the US Congress designate RSS as a terrorist organization after credible, tangible evidence to prove that RSS has committed heinous crimes of terrorism against the Indian minorities and against the Kashmiris? They have been written up by Amnesty International. They have been written up by Human Rights Watch. They have been written up by United Nations Human Rights Council. They have been written up by every humanitarian organization of the world. So how can you allow your US Congress to support, to arm, to facilitate the genocide of non-Hindus within India? Why aren't you calling for sanctions of India? Why aren't you calling for boycott of India? Why aren't you calling for a United Nations Security Council meeting right away to address the ongoing genocide? Look what they did in Bosnia. Look what they did in Myanmar. It took you years to acknowledge the genocide of Myanmar, but by that time it was too late. Millions of Muslims got displaced from Myanmar. Today, Ukraine is in a state of crisis, and nobody can condone to the violence happening in Ukraine, the war happening in Ukraine. Your war is destructive. It kills people. It displaces people. It destroys civilizations. But where is your compassion when it comes to Palestine? Where is your compassion when it comes to India? How can Moses, peace be upon him, have mercy on you? How can Jesus, peace be upon him, have mercy on you if you show selective compassion only for the white-faced, the blonde-haired, the blue-eyed people? Jesus, peace be upon him, Moses, peace be upon him, did not differentiate amongst people on the basis of their color, on the basis of their accent, on the basis of their race. They brought principles of equality. They did not say that one race is special compared to the other. This is not the lesson that both Moses, peace be upon him, and Jesus, peace be upon him, gave you. So how can you have selective compassion just for Ukraine and neglect and ignore and abandon the Indian minorities, the Kashmiri people, and the Palestinian children, the Palestinian worshippers of Al-Aqsa? If a mosque is not safe in United States of America, it is not good for the democracy of US. If a mosque is not safe in Israel, it is even not good for the democracy of US, because it is your money that is supporting, that is arming, that is sponsoring the state of Israel. It is your money that is being funneled into committing a genocide of peaceful worshippers in Al-Aqsa. It is your money that is being funneled to arm the RSS terrorists who are actually committing forced conversions of your Christian brothers in India, who are attacking the churches, who are attacking the mosques. It is your money that is sponsoring it. It is your money that is supporting, facilitating this genocide. How can you allow these genocides to happen under your watch if you are truly a believer in God, if you are truly a believer of Bible and of Torah? Muslims do not hate Prophet, peace be upon him, Jesus, Prophet Moses, peace be upon him. We respect both Moses, peace be upon him, and Jesus, peace be upon him, and we will not be Muslims the day we show disrespect for both of these prophets. Quran is full of stories about Jesus, peace be upon him, and Moses, peace be upon him. Read the Quran. It does not show hate against Christians or against Jews. It is mandatory for every Muslim to respect Moses, peace be upon him, and Jesus, peace be upon him, in order to stay a Muslim. This is how important it is for Muslims to respect these two prophets. But when it comes to you guys, why do you have selective compassion for Ukrainians and not for the Muslims of India and Palestine. Tell me, you have lost so much money and so much precious asset in the form of your soldiers and Marines who had to fight not a war for you, for your freedom, but to make a greater Israel within the Middle East. So many of US Marines got amputated, disabled, in order to create a greater Israel for the Israelis who are currently violating all what Torah teaches you, all what Moses, peace be upon him, teaches you. Israelis are the biggest anti-Semites of the world. How come if someone commits anti-Semitism, you confront that person in US, but when it comes to the state and the government of Israel, and that commits anti-Semitism by violating the principles of Moses, peace be upon him, you are shy to confront the state of Israel and the government of Israel? Why is this not important for you? You have lost trillion-dollar economy in trying to build a greater Israel just to make the military-industrial complex happy and profitable at the cost of your economy, at the cost of your US soldiers and Marines. You fought wars for free for Israel, killing Muslims for Israel, creating a Muslim genocide for Israel. That is the biggest anti-Semite of the world, currently attacking peaceful worshippers in Al-Aqsa. How can you justify an attack on peaceful worshippers of Al-Aqsa? Why aren't you confronting your government, your corrupt government, that why would you let this happen unchecked, undeterred, uncountered, unconfronted? Same thing in India. The saffron flag of RSS terrorists is trying to demolish all mosques. They have made hijab illegitimate. Girls cannot go to school anymore because they are disallowed to wear the hijab. They are losing their education because they are not allowed to wear a hijab. They are not allowed to practice their religion freely in India. How can India claim itself to be a democracy when it is not allowing its minorities to be able to practice their religion freely? I'm in US right now. I can wear a hijab. I can go to a mosque and pray. I can observe Ramadan. I'm fasting today freely, and I thank you for it. I appreciate you for it, that you do observe my rights as a minority. But your so-called allies and your so-called buddies that you so much glorify in your Congress are committing a genocide of your Christian brothers, of your Jew brothers, and of your Muslim brothers. At the end of the day, they are not even nice to the Orthodox Jews who are trying to follow the doctrine of Moses, peace be upon him, by standing up for the oppressed Palestinians. Even they are on the radar. Even they are being persecuted. There are so many Jews who are today fighting for the freedom of Palestinians from the Israeli oppression, and even they are under attack. Medea Benjamin, Jew. Bernie Sanders, Jew. So many Jewish Americans are fighting for the freedom of Palestinians, for their rights, for their human rights, for their religious freedom. Why aren't you? Even if you don't have any religion, even if you're an atheist, believe in humanity, because humanity works, right? How is it humane to support a country or a state that is attacking peaceful worshippers in a mosque? that is detaining, abducting little children. There have been documentation of harvesting, illegal harvesting of their organs. They are detaining journalists. Never forget Rachel Corrie. She was an American journalist. She was an American activist. Look what happened to her. Do you know who killed her? Do you know who was Rachel Corrie? She was an American girl, a young American girl, and she got bulldozed by the Israeli government because she was trying to escort the Palestinian children to school. This was her crime, to try to protect the Palestinian children from getting attacked, abducted by the Israeli cops. And you know what they used to call her? They used to call her a bitch. This is what they called your American activist in Israel who was trying to support the human rights of Palestinian children. They are not with you. They never were. They used you, abused you like a tissue paper. Right now, your US Congress is occupied by Israel. You are not a free country because you don't have a free foreign policy. You don't have a free defense policy. The military-industrial complex, the corporations, they own the US Congress. They own the foreign policy, the defense policy. They love wars because it sells weapons. But at what cost? At the cost of your inflation, at the cost of your employment, at the cost of your economy, at the cost of your GDP, at the cost of your freedom, at the cost of lives of your US Marines. How is this justifiable that you continue to support a state that is not with you, that has abused your tax dollars for its own interests? Same thing for India. India is not with US as proven in the Ukraine war. India defected to Russia as soon as the war started. But Pentagon has a cell for India within Pentagon. How is this explainable? Today, US is losing a war in Ukraine because of its reliance on India that is played as a double agent in the Ukrainian war, at the same time forcing mass conversions of Christians in India, at the same time violating every United Nations resolution to forcefully annex the territory of Jammu and Kashmir against the international laws as prescribed by the United Nations Security Council. Today, Indian Muslims are in grave danger. India is another Myanmar. India is another Bosnia. And by the time you act, it may be millions of Muslims and Christians who may lose their lives because they did not agree to converting to Hinduism. How can you justify your silence and your consent to this ongoing genocide of Indian Muslims, Indian Christians, Indian Sikhs, Kashmiris, and Palestinians? What is in it for you to justify this genocide? Tell me. How is it economically profitable for the economy of US to support a genocide of Muslims in Palestine and of Indian Muslims and of Kashmiris? You have lost unofficially your military base in India that has defected to Russia when you needed it the most. You have thought that you're going to use India to contain China, but the way you could not use India against Russia, you're not going to be able to use India against China as well when the time comes, because India only thinks about itself like Israel. They both have one agenda, the agenda of fascism, the agenda of fanaticism, the agenda of extremism. There is no difference between ISIS and Naftali Bennett and Narendra Modi today. They're all same on the spectrum of hate and fear, who are doing politics of hate and fear to expand their fanaticism, to expand the expansionism, to have a global domination agenda achieved on your tax dollars with your support and at the cost of your soldiers. These wars are not American wars. These wars are not your wars. This is Israel's war that has been imposed upon US for the last many decades, and it has given US nothing but trillions and trillions of dollars lost in economy and thousands of disabled, thousands of amputated veterans who suffer from severe PTSD today. So how can you still justify to continue your support for Israel and India? India wants to build its Hindu land, its Akhand Bharat Hindutva, by committing terrorism that ISIS did and still does, tries to do, and we're all fighting against it. ISIS is not just the enemy of US, ISIS is the enemy of every Muslim. We as Muslims fought against ISIS because we did not believe in its doctrine of hate and fear and global domination. But when it comes to the fanaticism, fascism of ISIS like Naftali Bennett in Israel and Narendra Modi in India, how come you're so quiet? How come you don't react? How come you don't respond? Today I'm here trying to tell you that your freedom is in jeopardy. US Congress is ruled by communists who believe that they can control every American. They take money from Israel and India and they don't work for you. They work for India. They work for Israel. So your tax dollars are not being spent on welfare projects to end homelessness, to end unemployment, to end your issues, but they are being spent to make Israel a greater Israel and to make India Akhand Bharat on your tax dollars. I request you kindly try to reclaim your freedom from Israel and India that have illegally occupied the US Congress right now, that are bribing your congressmen and your congresswomen with super PACs and next election funding in order to achieve a foreign policy that does not work for you and your children, but fascism, fanaticism, extremism of ISIS like Naftali Bennett and ISIS like Narendra Modi. It is your freedom, your civil liberties at risk right now. This country is going to be a foreign state. Act now before it is too late.